Hi, everyone. Thank you for tuning in. This is another episode of Bright Ideas. I'm here today with Autumn Sullivan, who is the owner of the Autumn Star. Very excited to have her here. Autumn, thank you so much for taking the time to chat.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited to be here.
Yeah, I think we're going to have a great chat. You know, we spoke a couple of times before, and really we just kind of flowed. And I'm so excited to share that with anyone who's going to watch this video. Before we jump in, though, why don't you give us a little bit of your background and your bio? Who is Autumn?
Sure. What an enigmatic question to start off with. So I'm a native Floridian. I was born and raised in Largo. I was raised by two fantastic hippie parents, which is how you end up with a name like Autumn Star. And also how you end up being, I think, how I ended up being a writer, because I had two parents who loved storytelling, who approached life from a storytelling aspect and always supported my writing. So, but you know how it is. Everyone always wants to have a backup plan. So my backup plan was to get an English degree, and I was pretty sure I was going to be the next Stephen King, but just in case that didn't happen, I went and got an English degree, and then I went to New York and I got a master's in writing, and I fell in love with editing. So I worked as an editor-in-chief at a literary journal. I worked as a fiction associate at a literary agency. And then I got a job as an assistant editor at Random House, which was like my dream gig, where I edited arts and crafts titles. Specifically because I knew a lot about comic books, and they needed someone to help
nice.
with their how to draw comic book division. Yeah, so being a nerd really helped me out in that one particular moment. It was awesome. It was amazing. It was the best. Like, it was so much fun to live in Manhattan and be an editor. But then I came back home to Florida 10 years ago, almost 11 years ago. And there is not really a publishing world here. So I kind of fell into marketing because that's what I could do. I could write. So again, backup plan. And then, so I've been a digital marketer for about 10 years. And I just started my own business, the Autumn Star LLC, in 2020 during COVID. I had that COVID moment where I was like, I feel like I should be doing something that fulfills me and not just living my backup plan. So it's been amazing. It's been so amazing. And we'll get into it. But I was so surprised how when I put my, when I dove into my passion, how the universe responded to me and came back to me with so much abundance.
Yeah, it's funny how some of those phrases that you use, backup plan. It's funny how those backup plans are not so backup sometimes, and they're more the main plan.
Yeah,
based on circumstance.
The main plan, don't they?
Yeah.
And we can talk about that more, but I am on a mission to change the way I talk to young people about that, where, when someone says I want to be a musician or an artist, and I don't say you should have a backup plan, because I think the message that we send is not if you fail, when you fail.
When you fail, right.
So I say, what is it? Denzel Washington has a great quote about fall forward. And I love that, because you always say we're going to fall back on it. And he's like, I don't want to fall back. I want to fall forward. At least I know what I'm falling into. And I'm like, yes, that's the attitude we need to have. Fall forward. Just go with your passion.
Absolutely. And, it's funny, especially coming from a writer who is a master of words, right? We have all these kind of undertones of failure and pressure and, oh, what if you don't? And it's like, but what if you do, right? What if you do succeed? And I think that that's a great awareness, in the way that we talk to young people of, look, do what you're going to do and then figure it out from there. You don't have to have two parallel paths totally planned out.
Right. What if you never questioned your ability to succeed? Where would you get to?
Right. Do you think that people kind of people who don't necessarily question their success, do you think they're ever truly as successful as maybe they could have been?
People who never question their success?
Yeah.
Oh, I don't know. I do think that I think people who never question their success run into the challenge of, are you learning if you're not failing? Are you learning if you're not questioning yourself? Like, I do think you have to have some moments of questioning yourself, or questioning your success. But what I don't think you have to do is question your ability to succeed, right? Like there are lots of moments in my writing where I will say, is this as good as I think it is? But I never ask the question, is it good? Because I know I'm good, right? Like, I better be. I've spent an awful lot of money getting degrees to be good at this. Like, I've spent my entire life doing it. Like, I've been literally writing stories since I was like 6 years old. My mom still has one in a drawer somewhere, like my first story ever. I know, it's ridiculous. But that's, so I don't question whether or not I am good. I question, is it as good as I think it is? Which is the danger, right? That I could let my ego take over, and then I become that writer that can't part with any of my words.
Right. Yeah, that's definitely an interesting thing. You know, when you say question, you say it more in like the contemplative self-awareness perspective. And I'm thinking more on the lines of, oh, not me personally, but, oh, I'm so successful, I've made it. And it's like, you never question of, is this actually making it? And I think, you know, even as I was just saying that, it feels more like that's all in the eye of the beholder, right? If you feel successful, you are successful. If a tree falls in the forest and no one hears it, it fell, but maybe no one knows about it.
Right. Definitely, we don't know if it makes a sound, but we know it definitely still fell.
Right.
I do think that's an interesting point, though, because like, so I have a regular job as well. I work for a company called Mobilization Funding, and our leader there, our CEO, talks a lot about your being driven by your purpose, and I do think that if we, let me see how I can say this. Let me see if I can stop and just gather my thoughts for a minute, because the lawnmower is loud and it's distracting me. If we, oh yeah, I lost it. I can't remember my train of thought. Tell me again what you were saying, and I will come in.
Well, so you were saying focusing on your purpose, that your CEO leans toward that. And my question was more around like self-awareness.
I got
Go for it.
See, that's all I needed was that little bit. So it's defining what does success actually mean, right? So if you're like, okay, I have the money, I have the power, I sit at the table. If that's how you define success, then once you reach those things, it's possible that you're like, well, I have succeeded, right? But I would ask the question, is success bigger than just the money and the title and the seat at the table? Is success living your purpose, your like grand purpose? Which makes me feel like Loki, like great purpose. Because if that is success, then you never reach a pinnacle of it. Every day is living your purpose. And so every day is a measure of success, which means you never stop. And you never stop analyzing, am I living my purpose? Am I being successful in this moment? It's just a very different way to look at it. So, and that's very much how I've decided, like I don't look at my business as successful if I made more money this year than last year. That's not how I am choosing to frame my business. And I've had a lot of pushback from people who are business owners that are like, you're either growing or you're dying. And I'm like, no, I've chosen not to subscribe to that. I look at it like the projects I worked on this year and last year, did they fulfill me? Did they fill my bucket? Did they fulfill my clients? Did they feel like they have done meaningful work with me? Do I believe that those projects will make an impact of good in the world? If I can tick those boxes, then I am successful, regardless of how much money I may or may not have made in the business. And that's just me. That's how I have chosen to look at my business. And I operate from a place of privilege in that I also have a job that supports me, right? Like I would probably have to worry about money a little more if I didn't.
Right.
I have operated from that standpoint from the beginning. And remarkably, when money has become a question, how are we going to do? Because you have a business so that you can make money, so that you can do things for your family. And so my daughter has cavities and it's going to be $500 to get her cavities filled. And all of the sudden a client will pop up and I'll get that new opportunity. So I don't focus on it so much. I don't define my success that way. And I feel like I've been very successful because of it.
Yeah. And that's a pretty existential, very mindful way of having control over that decision. Yeah. And you're right. The privilege does play a little into it. And I hate that word has a certain connotation these days. However, this is the world we live in. I'm curious though, do you find this to be like a generational thing? Because you didn't start out at, 22, 24, right out of school and said, this is my mantra in life. I mean, I can't imagine. If you did, I'm amazed even more. But I don't know anyone who lives in this world that we live in who did. And I think it's a very interesting dynamic, right? Because we're taught, I assume, I say we, who knows if it's applicable to everyone. I was taught, I assume you were, to have goals, to set goals. And when you reach them in 50 years, because that's the generation we're in, you will then retire and you'll be fine. Well, until you reach those goals way earlier because of modern technology and whatever else. And then you're like, holy shit, what do I do now? So that, I guess my question to you, and I've already kind of given you my answers, do you find that as a growth milestone, or is it just a decision you have to make at 22 or whenever it suits you to redefine happiness or success or something like that?
Yeah, I think that, so it's an interesting question, because I think like for me, and I assume a good portion of my generation, we had to get there. We had to go through a transformation to reach that point. But I feel like the younger generations, like I feel like millennials got their, I'm Gen X, so I'm the forgotten generation, but I feel like millennials have gotten there much faster, right? Because they've watched the baby boomers dedicate their whole lives to working because the company was going to take care of you, and then the company didn't take care of you. And they've watched Gen Xers work themselves into a lifestyle of I work to live and I live to work. Like I work insane hours, and there's there's a sense of hopelessness of like, and I know that no one is going to support me. I know that I have to have my own 401k. I have to be responsible for my retirement because they could fire me at any moment. We are a generation that has lived with the fear, the like existential fear of layoffs at all times. Right?
Yeah.
Because we've been through so many of them. The millennials, I feel like they are, and I know they get a lot of flack. And I am not anti-millennial. From the beginning, I've been like, I think maybe they're onto something. I feel like a larger portion of them was like, well, screw it then. I'm going to do this my way. I'm going to do my own thing and make it work. And I'm going to redefine what it means to be successful for me. We pick on YouTube stars, but they are redefining success in a media that they grew up with. And I think that that's actually pretty cool. I mean, you can argue whether or not their content is valuable. I mean, my daughter adores, she loves that stuff. She's like, they filled their entire house up with a ball pit balls. Can we do that? And I'm like, absolutely not. But it is fun entertainment. They are masters of entertainment. The guys and girls who are making these videos. And so I can't diss them for that.
Right.
They're, so, and I feel like the even younger generations are going to be seeing that and say, well, how do I want to define success? I hope so. I really hope so. Because I think it makes us, hopefully it makes us happier people, but I also think it puts an interesting pressure on companies. Like you want younger staff, you're going to have to do better.
Right.
And I love that. I think it's high time.
Yeah, it's interesting because I feel like you made a great point there in saying, if the millennials kind of saw the boomers, who I guess are their parents slash grandparents ish, depending on. I'm a geriatric millennial is the new title, which just makes me want to vomit in general. Those two words alone suck. Put them together and they're even worse. It's like it's terrible. But yeah, so they made this decision. So, your parents slash grandparents came up through this world of give all the time to the company. And then the Gen X grouping is like, well, we're kind of screwed. We're damned if we do, damned if we don't, right? So they're like, well, if we're damned if we do, damned if we don't, and we could get fired at any time, and companies don't keep you for 30 some odd years, screw it, right? And do whatever you want. But look at the creativity that comes from that. I definitely agree with this whole concept of again, like you said, what they're doing, not necessarily how they're doing it. But I wonder, though, if there's a ceiling, right? Because you've seen the cycles in television, right? And the latest fad of entertainment. Now there's all this AI copywriting and video production. I mean, I remember when auto-tune with Britney Spears and Cher was a problem. And here we are, EDM is now a thing where it's all auto-tune everything. So is there a ceiling, do you think, for this content creation? Or do you think it's just going to constantly evolve?
I have to believe it's going to constantly evolve. Because otherwise I would be under my desk crying because the
fetal position.
Right. So it's like, I need wine. because the alternative to that is the end of creativity, right? And because it would all be controlled by robots. And I am, I've read Google poetry and, I've read the AI poetry because I'm a published poet and poetry is very important to me. And so it's not good. and it's not good because it lacks empathy. We have not yet taught robots how to be empathic. And so you can teach a robot how to create a sonnet and it will have the iambic pentameter and it will have the rhyme scheme and it'll all work.
Right.
And you can even teach a robot to tell a narrative, right? So you could have an iambic pentameter, perfect sonnet that actually tells a story. But what I haven't seen us be able to do yet is we have not yet taught robots how to create the story under the story. Literally today, my LinkedIn post was about, over my vacation, I was reading the sequel to Watership Down, which is one of my favorite books. I mean, my daughter's middle name is Rue, straight out of that book. It's one of my top 5 favorite books. So, but it's a book of fables, and I was like, oh, these are amazing lessons in leadership and equality and in teamwork and collaboration. But on the surface, a fable is always a cute story about animals, and then there's a story under the story of, one of the stories is one of the female rabbits, one of the does becomes the chief rabbit. And it's the first time a woman or a doe has become the leader. And so they have to kind of contend with that. But it's a cute story on the surface. And then underneath you're like, oh, this is a story about equality and about the challenges to equality and the obstruction against equality. So there's a story under the story.
Right.
And we haven't taught robots how to do that yet. And I think even if we get to that point, if we teach robots to do that, then what we end up doing as humans will be something different that I quite possibly can't even conceive of. But I have to believe that we will continue to be creative. And so we'll be able to define success. For creatives, we'll be able to define our own success based on what we create. I have to believe that. Otherwise, I don't, there's just no reason to get up in the morning.
Yeah, no, fair enough. And I mean, it's funny, as you were talking, I was thinking of the quote from Henry Ford, is like, if I asked them what they wanted, they'd tell me faster horses. This concept of a car was inconceivable, right? Right. But yeah, it applies here as well. So we've talked about millennials, we've talked about the different generations, we've talked about now the fable with the female rabbit, the doe coming to the top. We've even talked about robots, right? So I see the thread. I don't know if you do. Let's talk about equality in the workplace, because all of that goes around. We have this world now where, in my opinion, I feel as if you're not, I think it's important that we're obviously striving toward equality, but I guess one of the things that I'm seeing is everyone is lauded as being the first to do X, the first female, the first this to do that. Do you think that diminishes the accomplishment?
Well, that's a great question. I don't know the answer to that. I think on some level it could, right? I think on some, because I think some of that is personal. It's how I feel as the first of something, right? If I was the first, whatever, if I was the first woman on the moon, but I was lauded as being the first woman on the moon. I could accept the story of I'm on the moon because I'm a woman and because they needed me to be the first, right? And that's a less than story. Mm-hmm. I'm not here because of my accomplishments. I'm here because they needed to fill this role. They needed this story. They needed this token.
Right.
I could accept that story. But what I see and what I am so heartened by is I see a lot of people in these identity groups of first standing up and saying, I'm the first because I am the best at it. I'm first because I was better than all the competition that fits in my identity group. And also I was better than everyone who tried to stop me. Right. So that's a different story. That's a greater than story.
Right.
So I think it can, but I don't think it necessarily has to. And I think the most important part is that we don't stop at first. Right. That's the real trick is when you're first, you turn around and you reach your hand down and you bring up the second, and the third and the fourth, because being if you are the first, that's amazing. You have broken so many barriers to get where you are. If you are the only, then we haven't done all the work yet. We haven't finished the job. Mm. So that's my perspective. I acknowledge that everyone has their own perspective on things, but I do think outside of being the first, I think we need more badasses willing to stand up in the room. We need people who have spaces of privilege to use them to be loud and speak out against inequality in the workplace. That's what we need. And I don't mean loud as in aggressive. Because I don't think you have to be aggressive. I just think that you have to be consistent and you have to be willing to show up. If I'm in a space of privilege, me personally, then I think, I don't know, it's an imperative for me. I don't feel like a whole person if I'm not speaking out against the fact that this is a place of privilege that I get and someone else doesn't. That's me. And I'm going through that journey. I mean, to be totally candid, I'm going through that journey as a white woman living through 2020 and 2021. What are my moments of privilege and what are my moments where I am the one who lacks privilege in this room? And how do I navigate those spaces? Those are conversations I'm having with myself and with others right now.
What are you finding with that? What is one of the realizations you've kind of come to? Being, because self-awareness, that's a pretty big piece of the world we live in, right? Understanding what you just said about privilege versus not, but also, where your skills are, where you're not. Everyone is not going to be carbon copies of everyone. Everyone is not going to be the next Elon Musk. Everyone is not going to be the next insert Simone Biles, right? What have you learned about yourself? Where has that taken you, that discovery, that inflection, reflection?
So it's funny that you would say that because everyone has different strength. And I was literally having a conversation today with a client who is writing a book about diversity and inclusion. And I was talking about how I had just got done rewatching all the Star Trek movies and how, I don't know, I'm a nerd. and how I loved that the Starfleet is made up not only of a very diverse, a diverse body of people in terms of like the humans, but also like extraterrestrials. Like imagine if you not only had to get along with a person who looked a little different than you, but like a legit alien. You're not ready for that. But what you see in the movies is how is what we talk about all the time about how diversity has a business outcome. It leads to more productivity. It leads to greater creativity and problem solving. You actually get to watch that in this amazing story. If you haven't caught the thread yet, I'm always talking about stories.
As an author, oh my God, what a concept.
That's what you watch, right? You watch Spock's logic and his human empathy come into play, and that be his strength. And you watch Uhura be more than just a pretty face. You get to watch her come into her moment of power and say, I'm the only one that can speak Klingon. I'm the only one who can do this job. And you're like, yes, girl, you're the only one who can do this job. You watch Sulu, who sits in the who gets to become captain, and he's been captain before, and it's like a small moment. He was already a captain once before, and then then Kirk gives him the chair, and that's an amazing moment because it's another person who has a very different concept of leadership, but he is equally qualified to be a leader, right? So there's all this diversity within this team, this amazing team, and they are able to like literally save the world because they rely on their differences instead of their commonality, which I think is beautiful. I think that's what makes Star Trek so beautiful, actually. And I, like, as a kid, I used to go to Star Trek conventions, so I can get like very nerd on it, but I think that's its heart, is the power of diversity when you focus on the strength of the differences instead of just the differences.
Yeah, I think context is everything. I do think maybe now someone watching this who is potentially a dean of a college will now do Star Trek, management principles in the next MBA. I think that would be quite interesting.
And, there's the other side of that, super quick, and then we can move on. But I do think the other side of that is that we say a lot of times in the corporate world, we want you to show up as your authentic self. But we don't create the spaces that feel safe and supportive to be your authentic self. And so it's very hard to tell someone, well, just be yourself, and not create an environment where that self feels like they can belong. So it's not you. That's my mission statement to business leaders is, if you want people to show up as their authentic self, then you need to do the work to make a USS Enterprise where your authentic self is not only accepted, but it is celebrated. It is supported and celebrated, because otherwise, why would anyone do it? Why would I show up as my authentic self if what's going to happen is I'm going to be, belittled, demeaned, or marginalized because of it?
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. And I think, just jumping back quickly to the millennial conversation we were having before, and especially the younger millennials, this next generation, I think they're probably one of the first generations that really has that sense of self. They've been, I don't want to say afforded, because I don't think it's that, but I think they've come up in a world where being your authentic self was okay. Right. And they had freedom's the wrong word, because I don't think anyone's never not had the freedom, but the comfort level to figure out who they are. Right. Yeah. I think there's massive identity crises kind of in the mix of all of the rest of the dynamics that are going on in a workplace, because, 1 or 10 isn't enough. And I think it's interesting to watch them have no shame in that. Right. I think a lot of times I know growing up, there was a certain way I was supposed to be. Right. And I just did it because that's how it was supposed to be done, or whatever. And, now as an adult, I'm kind of okay with that. Like, it was never anything I wanted to fight back against. But at the same time, I know plenty of people who were not free to do that, or ultimately had different feelings in that regard. But it's funny, I saw this story or meme or something the other day. I don't know if it's a video, something on Facebook, of course, but and I'm showing my age by saying Facebook and not TikTok, whatever. But it was about this woman who was cooking dinner and she was making a leg of lamb, and she just cut the edge off the lamb, put it aside, and put the lamb in the oven. And the husband says, "Why are you doing that?" And she says, "Well, that's what my mom did." So he's like, "Call your mom. I want to know why." So she calls the mom and she's like, "Why do you do this?" And she's like, "Well, that's what your grandmother did." Oh, okay. So then it must be important. So they call the grandmother. And the grandmother goes, "Well, listen, like my oven was too small to fit the whole lamb leg, so I cut off the edge and put it in so it would fit." And it's like, how, if we actually sit and reflect, how much of what we do today is because it was done that way at one point and no one ever thought twice about it. And it was simply a functional reaction. The lamb won't fit in the oven, so let's make it smaller. And here we are, generations later, cutting off the leg of the lamb and wasting all that meat or whatever. Just because, with a huge oven, a double oven, whatever, Iron Man kitchen, whatever it is. Right. But we don't even think about some of it. I think the self-awareness, or even just the awareness in general of why we do what we do is becoming more and more important and at the forefront.
Oh yeah. Can we talk about like the 40-hour work week and being in the office? And
let's go there.
All of those things are cutting off the end of the leg of the lamb because that's how my mom did it, because that's how my grandma did it. But we don't actually, we talk about the 40-hour work week and working in the office as though those things are sacred to American business. And the truth is that they are totally arbitrary. And I mean, you want real hand knowledge? We just went through it. Like my older sister is head of customer service for a very large organization. She has hundreds of employees underneath her. And I could not imagine the stress. But overnight, they had to transition them all to work from home, and they did. And they've been doing it for a year now. And now the conversation is, well, we want you back in the office. And I think it's a very fair conversation of why. Mm-hmm. Why? You never had to prove to me why before, but now you do. You have to prove why I have to be in the office, because what I have learned is that I am just as productive here at home, and I don't have to spend 2 hours a day commuting, and I don't have to be there for 9 hours because in a regular work day you get paid for 8 and you get an hour lunch, right? And so, but that hour lunch isn't truly yours because you are beholden to being back in that room in an hour. So are you really on break? Really? You usually take lunch with someone you work with, and you talk about work. Half the time you work through your lunch. I mean, raise your hand if you actually ever take a lunch.
I work for myself on my own hours and I still eat at my desk. It's asinine. It's asinine.
It's asinine. And especially now in the culture of, do you have your email on your phone, and we can text message each other after hours, and we can email each other, we can check our email. So we're never off. And so you company are paying your employees for a 40-hour work week, and they are actually working like an 80-hour work week because they're always on. And so it's a very small ask to say, well, can I at least be on at home? Right. Well, let me ask you. Oh, sorry, go ahead. I was just going to say, I go a step further in that I don't have email on my phone. Like, when I leave the office, I left the office. Please don't need me. When I used to joke, I say, unless something's literally on fire, please don't need me. Yeah. It has to be that level, because I'm, she's not going to be 6 forever. And she wasn't 2 forever. She was 2 for 1 year. And I want to remember as much as I can of that. And that's really hard when you're gone 10, 12 hours a day. Yeah, no doubt. But now let me ask you this. So do you think, and this is not a loaded question, this is something I've kind of reflected on. Do you think it's the company expecting 80 hours from a person, or do you think it's the employee not setting the boundary of when I walk out, unless something's on fire, I'm out for the next 12 hours till we do it again? I think it's both. I think that's a really great question because it brings up the subtlety of work relationships, right? So if my boss sends an email at 8:30 at night or 9:30 at night or 11:30 at night, they're working and I want to impress them. I want to stay on their good side. So is there a subtle expectation, whether it is true or not? Do you feel like you are pressured to then answer the email? Because I would argue that a lot of people are. They feel the compulsion to answer because a person of leadership is working, and so I should be working too.
Right.
Again, place of privilege that I'm in, plus kind of rebellious attitude that I have just always had. I don't really feel that way.
Right.
But I have had those moments. I can acknowledge that I've had those moments when I have been very, very dedicated to a particular boss, or a particular role, and I have compromised that feeling of I should have my own time to make that to get that person to like me, essentially, to be a teacher's pet. Like I'll work. I had the flu in New York. I had a raging case of the real flu. It's awful. It's the worst. I felt like I was going to die, but I worked through it because I wanted my editors to see that I was dedicated. And instead what I really should have focused on was I want my editors to be empathetic to the fact that I'm sick. Actually, that's what I should have wanted. And I want them to acknowledge that I will still get the work done because I am dedicated, but I am sick. And I think it works both ways. I think we set the expectation as leaders, and then we don't empower people to set their own boundaries.
Yeah, it's funny. I personally think it's completely a work-life generation thing. I'm not saying generation like Gen X versus Gen Y. I think it's a status within the company thing, or an experience thing, I guess is the word I'm looking for. When I was first in, you had to bust your ass. You had to do the next. And again, I say you had to, but that was the way I was conditioned, I guess, then. But then as I kind of developed, I like this, I don't like this style of management. I would never do this. I love what they did there.
Right.
I developed into the confidence, the experience of knowing what was required of me, what wasn't a requirement, that was a recommendation, and what was totally optional that maybe for years I had thought was the end of the world. And I'll tell you, I am the executive who sends the emails at 8:30, 11:30 at night. But I'll tell you, I would get pissed off when my people would respond. And I actually had to have a very candid conversation with them and say, listen, I am neurotic and I work at all hours because if I don't send that email, then I'll forget. But I don't expect you to respond unless I am calling you on the phone with a problem that has to be drop everything and figure it out. And you'll know if it's one of those. But if I say, hey, did you tell me you're off on Friday? You don't need to respond at 11:30 at night. There's a reason I sent that email, because I happened to think of it. It was keeping me awake, tossing and turning in my bed. So I fired it off from my phone. But I do think, though, that there's a level of that communication that has to happen, right? Because a lot of what, even as you were saying, like there's this assumption, there's this unwritten rule, there's this expectation, and it's like, but is there though? Right? Does that exist, or is it right here in these 6 inches between your ears, right? Where does that line, where is it blurry and where is it not? I'm willing to bet that if you actually had, not you, but whoever had a conversation with their boss or their understudies, whatever, about what are your actual expectations of me, and here's my thoughts on that in a professional, respectful conversation, I think both sides would be better off for it.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head when you said, like, I had to have a candid conversation saying, I don't expect you to respond. we as human beings assume all the time, right? And we, you know, oh, I don't want to say this because then they'll say this. And you're like, well, you don't know that because you haven't done it yet. Like you are telling yourself a story and you are believing that story. And it's very dangerous to believe your own stories.
Yeah.
So, but we as leaders, we have a duty to know that people do that. And to know that people are going to make assumptions based on our behavior because we are the leader of the company. And so we have to take that step forward and say, do not respond to me after work hours unless I say to you, I need you in this moment. Like because there's a difference, right? I do have the privilege to work anywhere and anytime I want, right? Your hours are more defined, and we can have a conversation about whether that needs to be the way it is. But for right now, that's the universe we work in, right? You have decided that what works for your life and works for our team is for you to work 9 to 6, whatever. So if I send you an email at 8:30, I don't need you to respond to me in that time. Right. I'm working, you're not. And that's unless I desperately need you, in which case I will show you my gratitude because you are showing me your dedication, and that's an environment we can both succeed in. You just have to have those conversations. But when you don't, like when I worked at Random House, every single editorial assistant, including myself, worked. We got there first, first thing in the morning. We were there before all the editors. We worked through our lunches. We stayed late, and we all worked Saturdays. I mean, we worked Saturdays to the point where it was like a funny joke because everyone was in the office on Saturday. It was like, oh, should we go get brunch after this? Like everyone's there. But it was because the expectation was that the books had to go out on time. Mm-hmm. And the workload was so great that there was no other way to succeed. And none of us felt empowered enough to go back to leadership and say, this is an unfair expectation of us. Right. You are asking us to do too much because we are working, 60, 80 hours a week. I mean, I had 4 editors that I supported, at one time. And I would probably I could have as many as 25 books on my list that I was, quote unquote responsible for, or I was at least supporting, and varying levels of support. Mm-hmm. Some of them were just like, send these papers to the author, get them back and review their feedback. Others were like, how's my book going? So yeah, but we didn't feel empowered. And so what happened was, because we didn't feel empowered to have those conversations, we left. There was an insane exodus of editorial assistants because they had worked for years, right? And their editors, when they voiced those concerns, the answer you get back, and I'm sure a lot of us have heard this before, well, you have to earn your stripes. That's, you just have to, you gotta put in your dues. You gotta earn the experience before you can get promoted. But the truth was, the editors had been there for 20 years. They weren't going anywhere. There was nowhere for you to go. There was no promotion you had. So they needed you in that role to do that grunt labor. And so we left. After a while, you just go, oh, well, this is an unfair situation. And there's nowhere for me to succeed here. And it was, what's been amazing to watch is so many of my friends who did that. Like I came down here and started my career in marketing. I have a good friend who moved back to Philadelphia and started a food blog for fun and is wildly successful from it. I have a friend that went into advocacy. We all redefined success for ourselves when we found out that the traditional system was stacked against us.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think that's super powerful. I think that's a testament to being able to do it. And because again, a lot of people can't do that, right? And I think it's important to acknowledge that. But I do think that mental health is a super important conversation, and a toxic work environment, whether you realize it in the moment or not, we can label everything in hindsight, of course, but a point where you are giving blood, sweat, and tears to this company who is telling you, oh, you got to earn your stripes. Like, I've been here 15 years. I got 75 stripes on my jacket, you know, and it's
zebra at this point. Like,
exactly. Yeah, it's funny. But let me ask you this. So, you know, in theory, I hope a lot of different people of different backgrounds are watching this series of videos, but you have a really interesting way of how you got into Random House. Can you share that story of how you got in? Because I think it's really important, whether it's a digital world or a person-to-person world. Can you share that with us?
Sure. So I was at Manhattanville, which is where I got my master's. Go Valiants, and they had guest speakers that would come in and talk about different aspects of writing and publishing and stuff like that. It was a very cool environment, and the speaker was Nan Talese, who is the editor-in-chief at Doubleday, or the head editor of Doubleday, which is an imprint of Random House. And she is the editor of Pat Conroy, who was one of my favorite writers. So I knew her. I knew her name. I knew who she was. And I saw her on the list, and I was like, oh my God. And I ran to my advisor and I said, I have to be in that dinner. Like, please let me be in that dinner. And she was like, yeah, totally. Come on in. So I went to the dinner. I got there early. I hung around and waited until Nan Talese went to sit down. And then I sat down next to her, and I didn't ask for permission. I didn't ask where my seat was supposed to be. I took the seat next to Nan. And I believe her daughter, who was a photographer, sat across from us, which was awesome because I got to have two great conversations that night. I got to talk to Nan and I got to talk to her daughter. It was super fun. And I made sure to actually talk to her and to engage in the conversation. And again, I just took the risk, right? I was like, this is my opportunity to show this person that I love the craft of editing, that I actually love the craft of editing more than I love the craft of writing, that's actually where my heart truly belongs. And I know that because a mentor earlier that year had asked me, Autumn, if you could spend all day writing or you could spend all day reading, what would you do? And I was like, I would read all day. I would read other people's stories all day. And she's like, yeah, you're an editor. And I was like, oh, cool. So anyway,
thanks for that.
That's what I want to be. So, and this woman is like the pinnacle of that. So, I mean, she's amazing. So, and her talk was great. So at the end of the night, after her talk, as she was walking out the door, I said to her, I said, I've had such a great time, and I hope you don't think I'm being too forward. But if I'm trying to get a job in editing, and if I apply at Random House, can I say I know you? And she said, oh yeah, you're a firecracker, and like, great to meet you, and left. And it was like a year later that the role came up where they needed someone who had editing experience, had calendar management experience at Random House for the arts and crafts imprint. And I got to put on there, when it asked, do you know anyone at Random House? I got to put on that I knew Nan Talese. And I got the interview. And there were others that got the interview, but I then got the job. But I wouldn't have gotten the interview if I hadn't put that, because trust me, I applied at every publishing house in New York City and some in New Jersey. Like, I put in my resume everywhere, and I never got callbacks, because in that environment, people are from Columbia that are graduating with publishing degrees, right? Like, the competition is fierce. And my editors said, they were like, well, you probably got the initial interview, like the HR interview, because you knew someone at Random House. You were, it was like a kindness. Oh, we'll give them the phone call interview. Then you knew stuff about comics, so you fit the niche we needed. And you had a lot of project management experience. We knew you could manage our calendars. We could teach you to edit. And I was like, cool. But it was the Nan Talese that got me the phone call. It was that moment. And so I've always like moved through the world recognizing that you can't pass up an opportunity. You've got to you have to go for it. Right. You never know when it's going to pay off, right?
Yeah. I mean, 101 in sales is ask for the sale. right? I mean, and you did that. You asked Nan, in the event this ever happens, can I use your name? And that's amazing. So, obviously, in a general sense, you have to go for what you want, but going for what you want is not like, oh, I applied to every, publishing house in New York City. Going for what you want is, I applied for every editing job at every publishing house in New York City. And I went out of my way to know things about the industry. And I went out of my way to talk to the be all end all of editing in New York. And I actually talked to her with substance. And I asked her if I could, go big or go home is not just a quote, right? I mean, it's not just an adage. It is literally put it all on the line, because what's the alternative, right? So
your backup plan is the alternative.
There you go. And we've come full circle. So let me ask you, if you had one or more, because we've proven we don't stick to one, advice for the younger generation, or the next the whomever that is watching this and might be thinking, I think I want to do whatever. What's your advice for them?
Yeah, my advice is keep your backup plan in the back. Go full tilt into what you love. And if it doesn't work out, I would bet lunch. I would pay for lunch that what you have experienced, what you have learned through your experience of pursuing your passion, will lead you somewhere where you can land on your feet. If you really want to be an artist, go full tilt into being an artist. And if you suddenly can't pay the bills, if it's not sustaining your lifestyle, I would say two things. I would say, one, check your lifestyle, because sometimes we have unrealistic expectations because we have a focus on materialism. Like,
very fair.
Right? Like, I could make more money, but then I would have to work more. And so instead I choose to keep my crappy car and live in a smaller home. Like, I've managed my expectations. I don't focus on the external things. I focus on my relationships and my health and my daughter's happiness and my husband's happiness. Those are the things that matter. So check your expectations on it, but also think about what you've learned, what you've experienced, and how can you apply that to a life that does sustain. I bet you know an awful lot about color theory. I bet you actually know quite a bit about design. And so I bet you can apply that. You can work as a creative in the corporate world, and then never forget that it's in the background, that it's supposed to be a backup plan, because that's what I did. I forgot. And it became my career. And I mean, it became my career into the point where it became my identity. Yeah. That being a professional who traveled all around the world traveled all over the country. I wish I traveled all over the world. That became my identity for a while. And I had to have like a pretty rude awakening that that's not who I wanted to be. So yeah. Keep it in the back and never doubt your ability to succeed.
Yeah, I agree. I think self-doubt becomes the worst enemy for anybody. I had an experience similar to that as we start to wrap up here. When I went to New York, because that's what advertising people are supposed to do. So I went to New York because if not now, when? And I burnt out in 2 years. I burnt out kind of. I thought I had burnt out at that point. Come to find out, it was not burnout. I experienced that a little while ago. But the bottom line was I decided to move back to Florida. And I said, what if I just go backpack Europe? And so I decided to do it. But it was still about 4 weeks out, and I started freaking out, right? And I said, I got to get a job for when I come back. So I started applying, and because I had the New York experience, I started getting a lot of calls, but they didn't want to wait for me to come back after. And I almost canceled my Europe trip. And it would have been the biggest regret of my life. But I remember talking to my dad, and he said, listen, Jess, I mean, come on. Have you ever not landed on your feet? Right? Like, you figure it out. You'll make it work. If you have to do something that is a little below your qualifications, then you do it until you find the right thing, right? But you always have that goal in mind. But I think it's important to remember, like, you've been all right up till now, right? You've figured it out every time until today. So what makes you think you won't in the future?
Right.
All right. So to wrap up, I have 5 random questions for you that have some and nothing to do with what we've talked about all day. So it's kind of rapid fire, so don't think too long about them. So first one, what is your dream vacation destination?
Ooh. I would have to say it's a tie between one of those awesome tropical vacations where you sleep in those little bungalows that are out on the water.
Oh, yeah.
Do that with the all-inclusive. You can eat and drink and do whatever you want. That. Or backpacking through the Scottish Highlands on horseback.
Oh,
yeah.
Man, you put some. You've been vision boarding that one for sure.
For like a decade, yeah.
Do it. All right, Apple or Android?
Apple.
Oh, it's unfortunate. No, I'm just kidding.
Easy. I want to be an Android person, but Apple is stupid easy. And
I got to tell you a funny story. I am like a monkey playing with tools when it comes to Apple anything. My mom will hand me her iPhone, and I'm like, can you open this? I don't even know what to do. Where is the back button? Anyway, how do you take your coffee?
Honey and cinnamon and almond milk.
Oh, that's fancy. I take mine through a main line. And what is one quote you live by?
Oh.
One
of the quotes I live by?
Sure.
So one of the quotes that I live by, I'm not really good with quotes, but there is
or a mantra, whatever.
Yeah, so there's a mantra that I live by, which is from Stephen King, because he's my favorite. But Stephen King talks about how inspiration is not a fairy that like lights on your shoulder and passes genius through you. The inspiration, the muse is actually like a grumpy old man in the basement, and you have to show up every day and just hope that he's in a good mood and that he'll, so you have to do the work, that it's basement work, that you have to get in there. And I believe that there are two sides of the art. There are probably lots of sides, but I was just having this conversation yesterday on LinkedIn of, does art like come from the ether and flow through the artist, or is the artist like part of the work? And I'm of the mentality that the artist is part of the work, that it's craft and it's toil and it's struggle and it's work. Yeah. It doesn't matter how beautiful it is. It doesn't even matter how much fun you're having while you're doing it. It's still hard work. And so when I feel uninspired, but I know it's time to write, I remind myself that it's basement work, and you have to get in there and do it.
Wow, that's a fresh perspective. It's refreshing that it's not just like, oh, it'll come to you, follow your passion. Like that's an important realization. All right.
They can't.
I know.
Like a giant novel, you are not going to feel inspired every day. There are days when you're like, I would like to do literally anything else.
Yeah.
You got to work.
I get, it's funny. Leo Messi just won the Copa America with Argentina. He's a soccer player. I don't know if you know that, but he is now lauded as the #1 most liked photo ever on Instagram. And people look at it like, oh, it's just some sports guy with a trophy. And it's like, okay, first of all, this guy has had a massive career in soccer, which might be one of the more demanding physical sports that we watch. He's been on the teams, he's been the leader, whatever. I'm not going to go into it. I'm not even a fan of his, but it's just like everyone just expects, oh, he just put up a photo and now he's got this title.
No,
it's more than that. Like you said, basement work.
It's work. It's hard work, even if you love it.
All right. And then final one, who is your idol?
Oh, great question. I choose not to have idols.
Okay.
Because I mean, I adore Stephen King's writing and he seems like a good dude, right? But I choose not to have idols because, well, at least, you know, he hasn't been exposed of like, you know, some crazy scandal. He hasn't said anything overtly sexist or racist that I am aware of. I choose not to have idols because people are people. And that means we're complicated, we're flawed, we're struggling to be better, hopefully. So I don't have idols. I have people whose work I admire, and I have people whose actions I admire, but putting them on a pedestal is dangerous for both of us. So I just choose not to do it.
Autumn with the fresh takes, man. I'll tell you what, that you have such a clear way of looking at things. I feel like you are so clear in what you think and what you do, and for lack of a better word, your brand is so impressive, like your personal brand, because you are the same messaging, the same, you know, kind of persona, no matter where you are, whether it's on LinkedIn. And I almost put, what is your number one LinkedIn pet peeve? But I figured we'd skip that one. I think anyone who follows you knows what that is. But so it is refreshing. I'm so glad we got the opportunity to chat. I hope we'll do it again, because I think there's so much value that comes out of these chats.
I'm sad it's over.
I know. I looked at the clock. I was like, oh my God, like that was a fast hour. It was amazing. So I want to share, and these will all be in the write-ups as well. Your website is theautumnstar.com, right? And Twitter, same, The Autumn Star. And then LinkedIn, your Autumn Star Sullivan. So I'll get that in the write-up that's going to accompany the video. But by all means, tell us, last in closing, what should people contact you about? Are you open to networking? Do you just like to have fun chats like this? Is there anything you're looking for or looking to do? Anything like that people should connect with you on?
Yeah, feel free to come connect with me on LinkedIn if you want to have conversations about, you know, the future of work, or storytelling. Any of those things. Don't pitch in my DM.
There it is. There it is.
There it is. And my Twitter feed is actually just a source of distraction and delight. So I follow a lot of horror writers, and I follow a lot of really bizarro people on Twitter. I don't ever actually use it for any kind of meaningful work. It's really just for fun. But feel free to join the party. And I am actively looking for my next project. I'm super selective, because like I said, I define my success by, you know, did it fulfill me? Did it fulfill my client? Did it make an impact of good in the world? But I am looking for my winter client. So if you think you would like to possibly work on a book in October, November, December, then you can visit my website and contact me through there, or contact me through LinkedIn.
Great. And you specialize in fiction, or are you open to anything?
No, it's funny. I write fiction and I love it, but my career has been almost entirely nonfiction in terms of editing.
Great.
I've done a lot of leadership coaching books. I've done a lot of retirement planning books, strangely enough. So I know, just a random.
Very interesting.
Yeah, and now I'm doing a lot of diversity work as well. So I'm working with diversity coaches, which has been super amazing. And I've done some memoir as well. Okay, very cool. All right, well, thank you for this hour of your time. Again, hopefully we'll opportunity. I'm excited. I think the more of these that I do, the more excited I get about them, because it's such a real look on the world that we live in, as opposed to, no offense, something that's been edited down however many times. So it's refreshing to get the candid view. And as everyone knows, I don't really edit these videos much. I add a front and a back. That's it. So you're getting the real deal. But thank you. We'll be in touch, and I'll make sure that everyone knows how to contact you. Awesome. Thank you. All right. Thanks so much.